It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel, where right now you can get the Texans at plus 1,000 to win the AFC. These haven't moved at all since what I think is a very promising free agency class. I've got John Harris with me today, longtime friend. You can find him on Sports Radio 610. You can also find him, of course, at footballtakeover.com. This time of year, it's awesome because John has been watching college players and evaluating them for a long, long time. And I'm really happy to have you on, John, especially after this free agency period where I feel like the Texans are better suited to go into this draft and draft closer to best player available than maybe they've been in a long time. There's guys that I would like and want and everything, but I don't feel that gnawing desperation to get a certain position this year.
I think the signings of Wyatt Teller and Braden Smith on the offensive line definitely freed them up in a sense to do that. I feel like the trade for David Montgomery freed them up to do that. And look, defensively, they were already pretty sound. I should say the signing of Reed Blankenship filled that one hole at safety that they tried to plug with C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and that was a mess. And then, M.J. Stewart did a nice job, and then he got hurt. Then they brought in Jalen Reed, then he got hurt. It was just a rotating cast of characters. So it felt like from a starting position standpoint, they just filled gaps with what I feel like are really solid players, guys that, they're Texans. There are guys where you're going, well, we hope C.J. Gardner-Johnson turns into a Texan, and then week 3 in Jacksonville, it all went to what. So I feel like they've freed themselves up going into this draft, where at 28, they could sit there and go, okay, well, this guy fell to us. All right, it's an edge rusher. Oh, well, we've got Will and Daniil, but, hey, we need some depth there. Hey, it's a corner. Look, Kamari and Sting are the best duo in the league, but we saw what happened in L.A. when we had to go to a third corner when Kamari went out of the game. It didn't look good. Hey, maybe we take a corner at 28. I think there are a lot of different options that they can go with where on draft night, which I like, we can say, all right, let's analyze why they drafted a quote-unquote tight end or why they drafted a running back. I think there are a lot of ways they can go, and analyzing those options is going to be really fun when they come up on draft here in the 23rd.
I think, we hadn't talked really at all about the Texans potentially drafting a tight end this year until after everything got hemmed up. I'm starting to see people discuss that more. And I saw on footballtakeover.com, your most recent write-up was on the tight ends class. Mm-hmm. And I know Kenyan Sadi is probably definitely not going to be there at 28. Is there any chance at all that the Texans trade up for a guy like Kenyan Sadi? If it's even, will he fall enough for them to be able to do that?
I don't think he's going to fall enough, Seth, but we've seen crazier things happen. But if it's not Sadiq and you're looking for – now, the one thing that sets Sadiq apart from other quote-unquote freaks that, hey, this tight end did this in testing and did that, a lot of those guys don't turn out all that well. Vernon Davis is the one that eventually over the years turned into a really solid player that had that athletic freakazoid gifts. But Sadiq's a better blocker than a lot of those guys ever plan to be. I mean, he's got the desire. He's willing, and then he's able to finish. I mean, as a split blocker, I've seen him take on defensive ends and just move them out of the way. He's done a great job as a lead fullback. He can do things as a run blocker that kind of separate him from other freakazoid athletes. That's why I don't think he's going to get to the Texans at 28. Now, Stowers, I think, from Vanderbilt will be there. I think it's a little early for him. But at 38, you could talk me into it because this guy with a 46-inch vertical, hands that are glue sticks, man, that's a threat in the passing game. He ran 4.51 at like 241 pounds. Yeah, that's an athlete I could go with, but he's not going to be the blocker. I mean, he's going to be a glorified addition to the receiving core. And so I'm like, do I love that? Do I want to look at a guy like Sam Roush, maybe late second, early third from Stanford, who's 270 pounds? He's a true inline wide tight end. He's just not as physically gifted as those two, but he's a big dude, and he will block his guts out. So I like the tight ends in this group. I've got about 24 of them that I think have draftable grades. So if they don't get one early, I do think there's a possibility they could get one late day 2, early day 3 that could come in there and do some good things.
Yeah, I think, and we've all noticed this, but I think I heard you talking about it the other day. On offense, this theme of physicality, which it looked like, okay, when they got Montgomery, it makes sense. He's a more physical guy. But then they draft Braden, or they get Braden Smith. He's a more physical run blocker. And then every move they've made, Foster Moreau and Wyatt Teller, like these are more physical guys. These are guys that care about run blocking. In the draft, if they do go offensive line, who are the guys at 28 and thereabouts that look like they fit that mold?
Well, there are two to me. I've said this a few times, Seth. I think the tackles in this draft I don't think they're great. The tackles that I would really want in this draft would be Max Iannaccio from out of Arizona State, because I think he's still got a ton of upside. He didn't play high school football. I mean, but he's a hell of an athlete. And I stood next to him at the Senior Bowl, and I kept kind of ogling him and looking at his thighs and his calves. I'm like, dude.
Was he the one? He was a soccer player, wasn't he?
Yes.
Until like in JUCO, and then yeah,
flipped it over and it went to JUCO and ends up at Arizona State. He's one of the guys, and it's not a long list, that had some success against David Bailey and Romello Height from Texas Tech. He really did a good job. Senior Bowl, he's kind of up and down first day. Second day, boy, he started locking some guys up. And it just his athleticism. I think he's a guy that fits that sort of physicality, swarm quality. The other two that come to mind for me are Texas A&M, Chase Basantis at guard, and then Emmanuel Pregnon, who I stumbled upon 3 years ago. I was watching actually at Boise State defensive tackle, and all of a sudden I kept seeing this guard from Wyoming just move guys out of the way. I'm like, who's this? Emmanuel Pregnon. He went to USC, then he went to Oregon. I thought his best football was at Oregon. I thought he took to the coaching very well at Oregon. Those to me are three guys that I look at and think they will set a physical tone.
Yeah.
Caden Proctor's a guy I think about a lot, but he's got to control his weight. And you and I both know as well as anybody, coming to Houston and trying to control your weight, it works.
Guacamole, man.
Yeah, it works in August when it's 8,000 degrees, but all of a sudden you get to October and you're having, like you said, chips and guacamole, and then you're going over to an Italian place across the street, and then you get some Vietnamese cooking, and you're like, man, I packed on like 10 pounds, and all of a sudden he's back up to 365. So I do worry about that when guys have had weight issues, but Proctor's really kind of kept it during his draft season under control. And in different combine pro day settings, he's kind of shown off his athleticism when he's at 350 pounds. And I wouldn't mind him, but I'm moving him to guard. I don't want him at tackle. I'm moving him to guard. And maybe with Teller and Ed Ingram, maybe Proctor needs some time. And maybe that's the right kind of pick at 28 to give him a little bit of time. He doesn't have to step in right away, kind of learn the game, learn the guard position, and end up being a guy that can be a Texan for the next decade.
John, when I came to Houston, you remember when I was in Jacksonville, we were in a 4-3, and I was a 3 technique. Yeah. We got to Houston, and they decided I was going to play nose tackle in a 3-4, and it worked out perfectly because after the first year, Brandy and I were living in the Rice Lofts downtown, and there was a Chipotle on the first floor. So I gained like 15 pounds the first month of my lease. And then there's that other place. There's that jazz bar down on the corner of that building too.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, I gained so much weight, and it was good. I needed to be bigger. So sometimes it can work out if you think a guy's got to put on a little bit of mass. It's a healthy fat.
It's a healthy fat. Yeah. For Proctor, it hasn't been. Yeah. But what I loved about what they did at Alabama is they essentially put a carrot out there and said, look, if you get to 360, we'll put you out wide and we'll throw you the ball.
Yeah.
And he's like, bet. And he took it, and he was awesome. They started creating plays for him offensively, which, might be another thing he can do depending on where he goes. But I think those guys are all around 28 that make sense, that fit to me kind of the ethos of that offensive line in particular. That Cole Popovich and DeMeco Ryans want on an offensive line.
Well, and one thing too, because I know when people start hearing about drafting an offensive lineman now, you wonder, oh, well, we're going to draft a guy in the first round. You want to play him in the first year. I mean, I felt like they went to 6 offensive linemen last year out of desperation more so than, hey, this is something we can really do. It would be fun if you got a stud in the first round and maybe there's not a starting role available for him. But if he lines up as your 6th offensive lineman, this actually becomes something that teams are nervous about because you can roll over people, which I guess leads to a question about the young offensive linemen right now. If you look at Blake Fisher, Jarrett Patterson, and some of those guys, what's and I would say Jake Andrews too. Like, what do you think the viability of either Jake Andrews at center or Blake Fisher making the team right now? Where are we with all those guys?
Yeah, that's a great question, Seth. I mean, I said it the other night on radio. I think that's one of the things that I'm watching during OTAs, mini camps, and then obviously the first week or so of training camp. We know how this goes, especially training camp. You start, banging the pads a little bit, and before you know it, man, you're down a couple of linemen. You're like, oh crap, I didn't think this lineman was going to end up making a team, but all of a sudden somebody's banged up. And we got to go back to old reliable in a sense. Jaret Patterson really kind of fits that bill because he's played a lot of center. He's played guard. He's done good things when he's had opportunities. But I've always said this about Jaret. I've always felt like center was his position because at guard, it felt like he'd get physically overmatched. But he had some good reps at guard. I do think it puts them on the bubble. Absolutely. Going out and getting Evan Brown in addition to Teller, and Braden Smith, and re-signing Trent Brown, and re-signing Ed Ingram, and probably drafting one or two offensive linemen, it absolutely puts them, squarely in the you're on the bubble. You got to perform at training camp and earn that spot. So I do think Jaret, Evan Brown, and Jake Andrews they'll compete at center. I think there's more there they could have gotten and they should get from Jake Andrews at center. And this is a really good center class in the draft. So I do think they'll end up drafting a guy that is a center and potentially a center only that can come in there. And of course, when you're a center in this scheme, it's going to take a second. It's going to take, Jake or somebody that's played in this to help a rookie through that situation. But I do like the rookies that are in this draft at center. And I really wouldn't be opposed, even at 38, Connor Lew of Auburn, a guy I like from Kentucky a little bit later in the draft, Yeager Burton. I really like him. I think Sam Heck from out of Kansas State is a guy that could be there in that third round, maybe pick 68, 69, where they're picking in the third round. So I do think center is going to be a draft pick that could come in here and compete for that spot. But I think it's going to be a no-holds-barred brawl to see who ends up being at center, and then who are the backups.
Yeah, well, and we went through mock draft review, as we do every morning on the radio, and they actually chose Hecht Becht. What's his name? The center.
Sam Heck from out of Kansas State.
Right. Hecht was the choice for the Texans, and I desperately wished I had John Harris on with me because I don't know anything about him.
He's a guy that when I stood next to him at the Senior Bowl, and I was like, I do that at the Senior Bowl, kind of just get an eye on guys. I mean, I'm looking up at him. So he's a legit 6'4", long arms, strong. I was really surprised how strong he was, how well he held up against big nose tackles, how well he moved, controlled the line of scrimmage and protections and all that at Kansas State. When we talked to him about the protection stuff, he said he and the quarterback would kind of work together. And that's obviously something he's going to have to do if he were the draft pick here. But I like the length. I like his movement abilities, leadership qualities. He's one of the guys I thought had a really good week at the Senior Bowl. Sam Heck would be a really good pick for the Texans to compete for that center spot. I think his heft, size, length just speaks to what they want to do. They want to move people off the ball a little bit more. I think a guy like Sam Heck from out of Kansas State allows them to do that a little bit better than maybe Jake gives them.
Texans right now on FanDuel are plus 2,000 to win the Super Bowl, just ahead of the Cowboys, who are plus 2,200. I might have to do a whole separate podcast about that. I'm glad you brought up the long arms of Hecht, because obviously right now one of the big talking points is Ruben Bane's short arms, and the Texans aren't going to have a chance to draft Ruben Bane. But I just randomly started thinking about short-armed guys, and I went and I checked Tommy Togiai, the defensive lineman, I didn't realize Tommy Togiai's arms were as short as they are. And I'm guessing it was a big talking point back when people are analyzing him and everything, but he doesn't play like a guy who's got short arms. Like he's very violent, and he uses his hands really well. What do you like? How much do you put into it with defensive linemen when guys have short arms?
Well, you said it, Seth. If you've got short arms, but you play violently, okay, that's step one. Step two is you better be strong as an ox. And Tommy is pound for pound. I think they've said this and said it publicly. He's the strongest pound for pound guy in this building. So the other thing I think people miss about Tommy is how quick he is. He's quick off the ball.
Yeah.
He's got really good feet for an interior defensive lineman. So when you combine his feet with his strength, and then, his quickness, you put all that together, and his violence, his desire to be violent, I think you end up with a guy like Tommy Togiai. And that's the one thing. When you said violence, you hit right on it with a guy like Ruben Bane. Ruben, I don't want to say surprising, but when you watch him bend, like, he really can turn the edge, drop the shoulder, and do the things that, a lot of longer, rangier kind of edge guys can do. But Bane plays the game so violently that I don't worry as much about his short arms. Now, look, there are going to be some guys, and you know this, Seth. This happens in every sport. There's always a guy that the matchup for you is just not good. Guy has long arms. Maybe a guy has short arms, but he's really quick with the punch. And there's always a guy that gives you issue. There's always going to be a guy that is going to give Ruben Bane an issue, whether it's a long arm tackle, whether it's a quicker tackle that, can beat him with a jump set or something like that. But because he plays so violently, like Will Anderson does, I think that's going to lead to tackles being more wary of him. And he does have good quickness with inside moves. I've seen him throw a couple of really nice spin moves, which I didn't think he had in his repertoire early in his career, but also just bending the edge against long, kind of rangy tackles and beating them with that kind of ghost rip move. I think that's something Bane can do. But you have to have a level of violence when you're that short arm. And I go back to last year, and it works on both sides of the ball, obviously. I was not a big fan of Will Campbell. I had him, I think, like 15 or 16 in my Harris 100. And it's funny, one night about a week or two before the draft, I called up my buddy Lance Zerline. I said, Lance is kind of the person I check in with, especially offensive lineman. I said, Lance, I got an issue. And he goes, what? And I just said, I don't get the love for Will Campbell. And he stopped and he goes, you're the first person to tell me that. He goes, you and I think the same way on this. And I just didn't love the way that even with the short arms, he would let somebody get into his body and then control him.
Yeah.
And it was like he was always trying to recover. And I just thought that was always an issue for him and was going to be an issue for him. And it showed up in year one. Now, he's a good overall player. He's got to adapt to that. I didn't think he played with the violence that a guy like Ruben Bane does. And I know it's offense, defense, I get that. But that's what the Texans are looking for. The Texans are looking for guys to be violent on both sides of the ball, and that's what Bane.
Yeah, and 100%. It's funny. There was a former defensive lineman who had always played. I can't think of who it is right now. He had played in a 3-4, like an old school 3-4, where they wanted him to just use your arms, control and everything. And he was watching a video of Ruben Bane hitting the sled, and he's explosive, and Ruben Bane's coming up and he's hitting the sled with his helmet in his hands at the same time. And this defensive lineman was saying, well, you never want to be like this. You never want to be like this. That's true in some schemes. I also had defensive line coaches like Bob Carmelowitz. I don't know if you remember him. He was with the Chiefs forever. His whole thing was violently exploding up into a guy and getting your helmet up under, like basically like a Pez dispenser, Yeah. And it was really, really effective. It was fun when you hit the sweet spot like that. So it just comes down to how you play. And I'm with you on Will Campbell or any other short arm guy. Lots of guys have short arms and play well, but I don't want to see you doing the exact thing you shouldn't be doing when you have short arms. That's right. You're letting a guy get his hands into you, and then you're trying to fight him off with your short arms. That's a tough one. As far as the rest of the draft goes, are there darlings that you're just really hoping might slide down that you're totally in love with right now?
Well, back in September, I was watching Arkansas Ole Miss, and Arkansas ran a toss play to their running back number 4. And I just, whoa. I mean, like instant love. I'm like, who is this? I don't remember this. I've done study on all these running. Like, who is this guy? This guy's excellent. And it turned out to be Mike Washington Jr. And I was like, what? How did he transferred twice? He's at Buffalo. He went to New Mexico State. Now he's at Arkansas. And now he's running past the Ole Miss defense. I'm like, wow. So we got to the combine. Not the combine. We got to the Senior Bowl, and he was there, and I was excited to see him up close. But I kind of felt like I was sitting on the secret. I got back from the Senior Bowl after watching him, and I did my running back rankings at footballtakeover.com. I had him at number 3 behind Jeremiah Love and Jadari Price. And I had a couple people email me like, who's this Mike Washington guy? And I said, just wait, give it a second. And then he goes to the combine. He ran 4.33 at like 6 foot 227. And I was like, well, my secret's out.
Yeah.
that was going to be my guy, but nah, that isn't going to happen. I'll tell you a guy that I really just recently, it's funny because I hadn't really been thinking about watching him. I mean, I'm going to study every position, but I'm not going to put a focus on edge rushers because the Texans have Will and Daniil, But then the more I thought about it, I thought, you know what? I think they might look at this edge class because it's pretty good. So I pulled up some film of UCF's Malachi Lawrence.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I was floored. I was like, but he looks like he's 225. Nope, he's 253. And just dominating the edge. I mean, going through everybody and just playing like a demon. There was one play against Kansas State. Kansas State's got a quarterback that runs like a 4.3, Avery Johnson, and he can move. Lawrence beats his guy. Johnson sees him, and then all of a sudden there's this kind of cat and mouse game to kind of get around. And so Lawrence kind of slipped a little bit. So Johnson thought, I got the sideline. Lawrence comes from behind and just swats him over the top, knocks the ball out, knocks him out of bounds. I'm like, wow, this guy's a different level of speed. He's relentless. I think he might end up going pretty high in the second round. And I started thinking about pick number 38 for the Texans. Like, that's the kind of guy that they don't have, just an absolute blur off the edge. But he's 253 pounds, so he's big enough to set the edge. Man, Malachi Lawrence from UCF really has kind of popped for me the last few days. So maybe I'm giving away my secret, but that dude he's turned into one of my favorites. Just watching him every single game, just relentless. I mean, he just beat up University of Houston off the edge. It was impressive to watch.
Footballtakeover.com. You haven't done a mock draft in a little bit. I'm guessing you were waiting until free agency shook out. Are you doing you got another one coming up soon?
Yeah, mock draft coming up. I'll be working on it this weekend, but also working on my Harris 100 to have that set. So that is due to come out next week. So I got the weekend to work on that. So I'm getting the 100 ready. The mock is on its way as well. So those are the two big things. So I have those next week right there at footballtakeover.com.
You got anything you want to say about Ty Simpson to get it to go viral or anything? That's
No.
I'll
say this about the quarterbacks. If you need a quarterback in this draft, I feel bad for you.
Yeah,
I really feel bad for you.
With Orlovsky,
don't like any of them.
I wonder about there's an element to it where, okay, the love for Fernando Mendoza is probably overboard, and that if he had framed it a little bit differently, is it fair to say that there's probably a lot of people that have those two closer than maybe what the perception is, even though there is a clear number one and number two? But you haven't talked to anybody that has Ty Simpson better than Mendoza?
No, I haven't, and I don't think that they're. How do I put it? I mean, Fernando Mendoza is going 1 because the Raiders need a quarterback, and he's got the intangibles to be a number 1 quarterback and to lead a building. Not saying that Ty Simpson doesn't. I think you're right. The way that Orlovsky framed it, he made it, well, Ty Simpson's number 1 because I don't think Fernando Mendoza is number 1. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
But if you look at some of the things, I don't like the way that he kind of tore down Fernando to kind of pump up Ty Simpson. If you're going to talk about Ty Simpson being QB1, then tell me why Ty Simpson's QB1. If you look at the first half of the year and some of the throws he made, like there are a couple throws in the Missouri game, like, whoa, that's impressive. But second half of the year, it broke down for him. So was that game got too fast? Teams got film on him. He was banged up. Any and all of the above? We don't know. And so because of that question mark, okay. Fernando Mendoza in the biggest games made some tremendous plays, and there were some things that weren't asked of him at Indiana. But I think in Clint Kubiak's offense, I think Fernando's going to fit really well. I think he could throw on the run. I think keepers and boots. He runs well enough. I mean, we saw that in the championship game, but he throws on the run, I think, pretty well. So I think he's going to fit in Kubiak's system. And look, they need a rock star leader that's going to have the attention of everybody in that building. And I think Mendoza is that. I have them separated. Part of it is just I don't like any of them. I don't like any of these quarterbacks. I don't want any of the quarterbacks in this draft on my team or anywhere near my team, other than maybe Taylor Green, because he's going to make preseason games really hella exciting, and that's going to be fun because he can run a 4.3 at 6'6", 220 pounds. but he scatters shots the ball all over the place, but he's really fun to watch. That's about it. Other than that, I'm waiting for 2027 if I need to get a quarterback, because that's the class. That class it'll have everything, not just quarterbacks, wide receivers, edge players. Man, it's an incredible class. This year, I'm moving right on. I'm getting my trenches fixed, because that's what this draft is about. I'll get my quarterback later.
You've got to get going. I don't want to keep John McClain waiting. So say hi to John for me, and I'm going to leave you with this. This is what I'm going to look like 6 months from now. I had ChatGPT work up my, as I'm growing the beard out. So that's what everybody has to look forward to.
That is fantastic. That's the best thing I've seen all day, man. I hope, please make that happen. That would be fantastic.
Have a great one, John. Great chatting with you. Thanks, man.
Appreciate it, Seth. Thanks, man.